Hello, I'm Martha Engber, host of Vigilant Positivity, a blog and podcast meant to decrease polarization by uniting Americans through civil discussion that leads to common ground. Thanks to those of you who've tuned in. Please feel free to subscribe and grow the common ground movement. Today I'm talking with Dr. Beth Malow, a neurologist, and retired Representative Doug Teschner, Republican, New Hampshire. Hello, Beth and Doug. Thanks for joining me.
Well, so
Hello.
good to be with you, Martha. This is wonderful.
Yes.
I feel, yeah. Did you want to say something else, Beth?
No, just I'm happy to be here. Yep.
I've featured Beth and Doug on separate occasions and bring them together today for an update on their recently released book, Beyond the Politics of Contempt, Practical Steps to Build Positive Relationships in Divided Times, which I've read, enjoyed, and reviewed. Beth and Doug are both members of Braver Angels, a national nonprofit dedicated to uniting Americans through civil discussion, as is their third co-author, Becky Robinson. All three maintain the Together Across Differences Substack newsletter. Let's dive in. Beth, can you start off by telling us an update about the book? How is it being received?
Well, very well. We released it on September 9th, and we've been really excited by how many people have reached out to us, have wanted us to do events. We're still trying to break international. So if any of your listeners have any ideas about that, we would love that. Locally, though, it's been going really well, and I think that also speaks to New England being really very interested in these kinds of issues. So we've been to several libraries and bookstores and discussion groups. In fact, I was at a discussion group this weekend, not about the book, and somebody came up to me and said, "Hey, my book club is talking about your book tomorrow." So I was really tickled by that, and I've been very happy to see so many people who are telling me this there's such a need for this book right now. That just really warms my heart.
Wonderful. I was going to ask you, Doug, what are the common comments you've been hearing from readers?
Well, we've seen a lot of positive support. I mean, I think people are hungry for this, for the most part. Sure, there are skeptics. I mean, there are people that just don't think they can talk to people on the other side, and we've seen some of that. And I guess I appreciate those folks' honesty. At least that's where they're coming from. But we've had a lot of, there's been a lot of curiosity. I just think people are really, people are hungry. People want to have some hope, and this is what we're hoping to deliver.
Well, let me start with one of the bigger questions to get us really going. When new phenomena first appear in our culture, it's often hard to grasp what's going on. Americans have long known the polarization in this country is getting worse, but we haven't been able to put our finger on why. That's what I appreciated most about your book, learning the specific terms and basic reasons for the extreme rift. I learned, for example, the term conflict entrepreneurs, or those who benefit by dividing Americans. They're politicians, political parties, and hostile foreign nations, to name a few. And they spend billions every year to fund toxic messaging meant to incite extreme and negative emotions such as outrage and hate, which spurs people to often take negative actions, whether donating money they don't have, haranguing those who have a different political viewpoint, or even in extreme cases, carrying out political violence. What role do you see your book playing in educating Americans about how we're being manipulated, especially in being sold the lie that if we don't hold a certain political viewpoint, we're the enemy?
I can start with that. I have some thoughts on that. The first is that I feel like that is one of our superpowers in this messy time, in this really challenging time, is that Americans don't want to be taken, right? They don't want to be had. They in fact, one of our Substack posts, we're doing a Substack together now.substack.com, is called we're better than this. And it addresses the idea that there have always been conflict entrepreneurs, people who derive power or profit from dividing us. Uh, it may be more prevalent now with social media amplifying the messages of the conflict entrepreneurs. But as Americans, we can look at that and we could say, you know what, we're better than this. We don't have to become conflict enablers where we spread what the conflict entrepreneurs want us to do to our silos, right? To our bubbles. Instead, we can say, we're better than this. We're not going to send that tweet or repost that insightful, that inciting comment. So that's one of the strengths I think we have as Americans.
Yeah, I would add that, we really want people to be aware that there is such a thing as conflict entrepreneurs. A lot of people aren't even familiar with the term or familiar with the concept. And I think once you get some familiarity with it, you begin to understand, well, wait a minute. It gives you the first step to sort of step back, think a little differently. In our book, we tried to come up with graphics and things to make it easy to read. And what we came up with for the conflict entrepreneur is a crocodile eating the American flag. These conflict entrepreneurs, they're not doing this for the country. They're not doing this to make our lives better. They're doing it for their own benefit. And for the most part, having the opposite effect of benefiting the country. And I think the most critical piece is for people to say, wait, is to really understand that. And I think if we can help people see that, I think that will be very effective. And also, as Beth mentioned, I mean, the way the social media algorithms work, they keep pushing us down these rabbit holes, a lot of it is really driven by what the conflict entrepreneurs are telling us. So self-awareness is really a key part of how we can manage this challenge.
I think that's interesting. For myself, I think everybody wants to believe that they are not the person being manipulated. Essentially what I thought. It's not me that's being manipulated. But then when I realized that essentially it's this third power, if you will, that's having an effect on all of us, it allowed me to step to the side of any American I'm with, no matter their viewpoint, and say, hey, look what they're doing. In other words, get on the same side. Do you, how difficult do you think that's going to be? Um, to get that across to people is that we're all being manipulated. It isn't just you. It isn't just me. We are all being manipulated.
Well, I mean, I think it's challenging, of course, because we're in this media environment now where if it screams, it streams, and if it's kind, pay no mind. I mean, this is the way the social media works, and to a large extent, this is the way the mainstream media works now. The way there's so much competition that nothing's people the stories that are going to attract interest are going to be things that are divisive and somewhat outrageous, and it makes it harder for us to try to sell our book because we're not promoting outrage. We're really promoting the opposite. We're encouraging people to step back, take a deep breath, and look at things a little differently. But it has to start. It has to start inside. It has to start inside each of us. And when you were talking, Martha, I was thinking about something that you expressed some humility. Humility is so important, but it's sort of out of fashion these days. We all want to be so sure of ourselves, and so that we know what's right, and they don't. And to be a little humility and also curiosity. I think those two things go hand in hand.
Yeah, and I would add that sometimes the hardest person to talk with about these types of things is not someone who voted differently than you or feels differently than you on a contentious issue. It's actually your echo chambers and your bubbles. And in other words, those are the people who are going to say to you, well, Beth, you're being really nice. is in the book. It's nice that you feel that way about those people, but don't you know they're destroying our country, right? And I think that could be said whether you're on the left or on the right about the other side, right? So sometimes it's the hardest people to work with, at least for me, are people who I feel like are closer to my side and are just questioning why I'm doing this work, why I'm being curious when in some ways, in their view, the house is burning down, right? Or we're rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic. So that's I think the missing piece is it's like we say in Braver Angels, if we can get people to a workshop, we can teach them the conversational skills they need to connect. But how do you get people there, right? How do you get them to say, like as Doug is saying, open their heart and be able to be curious and be humble?
Yeah, I don't know whether it's curious or humble, but I think it's mostly that when we are with those people in our own bubbles, I think that that is really difficult to because there's a habit that's there. You all get together like a sports team, and everybody you trash talk the other team. That's what you do. So then, when you are the person who moves away from that behavior, well, now you are suspect. Hey, whose team are you on? And then from there, so it's that's just been my experience. So
Oh,
what,
I would agree with that. I would agree with that too, and with what you're saying, with what Beth's saying, and this is where people tend to be quiet, maybe you don't want to lose, you don't want to alienate your side, and you suddenly can find yourself in a very isolated position. And then so there's sort of these incentives to sort of not go there. There's a lot of incentives not to do the kind of work that we're talking about, uh, um, unfortunately. But we think that we can make the case that people will be better off and feel better about themselves, feel better about their lives, feel better about their relationships with others if they can take these steps.
Right. I wanted to say that I'm really glad about the timing of the book because I feel like had we released the book earlier in 2025, it would have been more of that echo chamber and retreat into our silos. And I think people are realizing I've got to try something different. What we're doing isn't working. And maybe I'm talking more because I lean left from that side, but it's this sense of what we're doing isn't working. There's got to be a better way. We really have to figure out how we're going to talk with each other if we're going to get past this moment in our nation's history. So I feel like something's shifted in the last few months, and people are recognizing the importance, for example, of being an activist, but also being a bridge builder, and how they're not incompatible.
No, I think that's interesting. Since the last time that we've talked, I've thought about that. You were mentioning that it's very important. You can't just talk, you have to actually take action. But how you take action matters. So, for example, I am still very politically active, but how I'm politically active is very different. If I go to a protest or a rally or what have you, my sign does not say F somebody. It says the point that I would like to make. Please do X, or please watch out for X. And so how I'm wording it. And so just being able to speak this to the people I go with and saying, certain things are not okay for me to say anymore. And I consider them negative and I don't want to hear them, from other people. So I don't know, how have you changed? What behaviors have you changed since writing this book?
Wow, well, that's a great question. I mean, I think when we started writing the book, it's all about, and I think this is sort of maybe the braver angels mentality. Come with us and help save the country. But as we were working on it, we got into much more sort of, I think, a deeper level with first of all, a lot of people are stressed about their mental health. And come to us and we'll help you feel better about yourself. I think people are really struggling with relationships, and you know, and you come to us and we'll help you figure out how to manage Uncle Fred and your relationship with Uncle Fred. Um, and then we got into this activism and bridge building. Come to us and you can advocate your side, but don't do it on a way that's just going to alienate people on the other side. Do it in a way that might win them over or bring them over, or at least keep the door open. So you know, there's a lot of different levels to this, and also, you know, what we also talked about, how do you find a project in your community that needs help and and connect with people to solve that problem, and in a way that transcends politics. So these are multiple different levels of how we sort of see the book, and we didn't maybe quite start off with that sort of an insight. What do you think, Beth?
I've become more curious about my own side. I think that's been the biggest surprise for me is I've really tried to, I don't think the right word is provoke, but I've tried to really try to get people to tell me what they're concerned about. Like I was doing a Brave Angels workshop and I was teaching the skill of acknowledge. It's a very common skill. It's not just Braver Angels, any active listening course or way of life will teach that. So, Martha, you say something about, I really believe that we should have capitalism. I'm just making that up. And that's really, really important. You know, individual initiative, personal freedom. And I would say, wow, it sounds like it's really important to you that whatever. And I'm not agreeing with you, but I'm acknowledging that I heard you. And that makes you open up more. And it's the first step to having a conversation. Well, I was at this workshop and one of the participants said to me, I can't acknowledge because then I'm giving weight to non-democratic norms. And I was like, what? And I was just like, so I tried to stay curious, right? I didn't get upset. And I was like, this is the answer. This is it. Something in what she just said is what I need. I need to break that through that kernel if I'm really going to be influential. I need to understand that better. So that's been my biggest surprise is I become much more curious. I become much more open. The chair of our DEI council and I are now playing pickleball regularly, right? Where I live, you know, getting back at Doug's idea of doing things besides talking about politics. And now it's easier for me to talk with her about what she's thinking and believing. And it's that's been the biggest surprise to me is just really feeling like I'm trying to understand some of these barriers by connecting with folks who I normally would have maybe stayed silent about before the book.
I suppose that's one of the things that's most interesting is I like to follow a lot of neuroscience podcasts, and it's aggravating to me that the neuroscientists come with their studies and they tell me things like, "You think you're not being manipulated, but you are," and they, you know, so it's a matter of how do we overcome our biology. Because neuroscience says that it talks to about the habit you're talking about is I don't want to agree with you because if I do, then I am showing I'm wrong and therefore I'm vulnerable. And that can't be good because then I'm open to attack.
Yes, there's a
Yeah.
lot here. You were going to say something, Doug.
Well, I've heard the same thing from people, you know, that if you acknowledge what someone says, you're somehow giving them space, or you're acknowledge you become part of the problem, when we feel it's very much the opposite. You know, acknowledge, and this is where people, you know, it's ironic in these days where people have so many friends, so to speak, on social media or whatever, but how many people really have relationships with people who have a different point of view? We're in our bubbles, or some people call them tribes or silos, you know, where we're all just talking to people who think the same as us. And I think one of our words of advice is just step out of that. And when you're at one of those, if you're going to a demonstration, there's somebody there from the opposite side, maybe you could go up to them and say, hi, or introduce yourself and say, maybe we could go to coffee tomorrow or next week. I'd like to hear about your family. I'd like to hear about your upbringing. I'd like to hear about your hobbies. I'd like to play pickleball or whatever. And I'd like to hear how it is that you came to your political views. And this is a lot of work, and it's not easy. And sometimes people just aren't going to accept it. They don't want to go there. But this is the work that we think is so critical.
So I might jump in and just say, I'm not sure you know, Martha, but I am a neurologist, and I've
Right.
always been fascinated by this, exactly what you said. I don't think we're creatures of habit and fear. I think we can break out of it. It's not always easy, as Doug has said. I think we can do it though. And I think curiosity is one of the key things. So flipping things on its side, like as we were talking, I was remembering I also do autism research. And I realized one of the things you do with kids when you're trying to break some of their being in their own little world is like they're lining up all these red cars and you find a green car and you stick it in and it makes them think, right? And it actually is one of the treatments for autism is like breaking up patterns like that. So when we have that conversation with somebody who's different from us, it opens up all these new neural pathways, and we can then get even deeper, right? I know people, it's kind of, I love that I was in Tennessee for 21 years. It was so good because I met so many people who are different than me, including politically. And I know people, I have friends who don't know anyone who's a Republican. I mean,
Yeah.
you don't know anybody who's a Republican? They don't have any friends who are Republicans. I'm like, oh my gosh. So they automatically assume when they listen to the news that all Republicans are a certain way. And I'm sure there are people who don't know Democrats and they think all Democrats are a certain way. So like breaking through that, I think is really important. I think we can absolutely do it. We're not, those neuroscientists who tell us that we're stuck, I think they're wrong. I really do.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about a few things that are happening, of course, in the country as relating to your book, because it's a an amazing time right now for 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 better or for worse. Um, we've talked about the extreme imbalance that currently exists between conflict entrepreneurs and common Americans. They have a lot of money, know-how, and organization. How are we Americans supposed to fight back against that when our own politicians and political parties are part of the problem?
Well, I think it has to start. You have to start in your own heart and how you think about people and what are your values. And we put a lot of emphasis on this in the book. What are your values? And are you living those values when you think about people that disagree with you politically? I mean, I think that's a really key step. Look inside yourself, look in your own heart. And and avoid assumptions. We were talking about this earlier. People are so quick to make assumptions. Well, it's human nature. We all do it. I mean, somebody walks in the room and how they're dressed or whatever, and there's always a tendency to make certain judgments about that person. And we all do it. I do it, of course I do, but I'm also very aware. I've developed this really hyper awareness of, okay, maybe I shouldn't have, maybe let's be a little careful here, Doug. And part of this, when people aren't mingling or connecting with people with different point of views, it's so easy to develop this sort of dehumanizing view of people on the other side, this us versus them mentality, which is just so destructive to our country. We know from our Brave Angel workshops, when you get people in the room and they start talking to each other, they find they have a lot more in common than they realize. And they're always a little surprised by that. And we have to really, as individuals, we have to recognize that and sort of begin to start from that point of view. and show a little humility, a little curiosity about how we see other people.
Yeah, I would just add to that, do something that isn't political. So for me, I mentioned the pickleball. I'll also mention singing and music. And when I was in Nashville, I sang with a group of a cappella singers. And only when I was in a quartet did I realize that somebody I was singing with was someone who had voted for a different person for the presidential election in 2016. And we were already friends and we already respected each other because we were both pretty disciplined about learning our music because we sang in a quartet. We had to be. And it was very different. Like I couldn't demonize her, right? Even though all of my friends were demonizing people who voted that way, I couldn't do it because she was my friend and she was my, we were singing together. So I think that singing together, playing sports together, gardening, I mean, there's so many different things we can do. And I would just say to people, get out there and try to get out of your bubble and try to meet people where they may be different than you. And then once you do, try to like be brave and have these conversations. So we'd be driving back and forth from our competitions and performances. Once we had to go to St. Louis. So we're going from Nashville to St. Louis, and we had like, what, 5 hours. And we talked about abortion, we talked about LGBTQ, we talked about climate change. I mean, it was incredible. And she felt heard, and I felt heard and we didn't agree with each other. We still disagreed on everything that we talked about, but we didn't like hate each other. We didn't demonize each other. And that to me is a really good place to start. So make a new friend, and you never know who they might have voted for.
Very interesting. What educational awareness campaigns and organizations are you hoping will take the lead to unite Americans against conflict entrepreneurs and against this kind of messaging that the other side is the enemy, which I think is outrageously dangerous and getting more dangerous.
Yeah, well, braver angels for sure. I think one of our strengths is that we really have balance at every level of leadership. We have someone from who leans left and someone who leans right, right? The reds and the blues. I think that's really important. Even I think about with our book, we made sure we did that, right? With Doug being a former Republican state legislator and me being more left leaning. So, I think every level of Braver Angels does that. Now, it's not just Braver Angels. I mean, one of the things I love about this book is we keep meeting new people. So we've met somebody from a group called Listen First that has more than 500 bridge building organizations in it. And it's only because of the book and being contacted by her that we learned about them. So, and there's plenty of other groups out there. And I feel like all of these bridge building organizations are working really hard right now to raise the awareness of the American people that we are being manipulated and there is a way forward. And it's less about we wrote a Substack on this again, Together Across Differences is our Substack. It's less about being on the left or being on the right. It's more about being in a realm that Manu Meal talks about. It's this, saying I'm going to talk to you, even if we're different, even if I totally disagree with you. I'm going to talk with you. I'm going to hear you out. I'm going to connect with you. And that's what we have to do as Americans.
Yeah, and I just add that, one of the things that really concerns me is, politics has become so central to people's identities. Why? How did that ever happen? It used to be people weren't that concerned if their child married someone in the other opposite political party. Now there's data that says a lot of people are. And there's so many aspects of our identities, our hobbies, our history, our family, our geography, and yet somehow politics it has somehow become so central to who we are as people and how we define people And we really need to find a way to step back from that. And look at things a little differently. So I mean I think our cause, and we're appealing to this group, the hidden majority. There's the exhausted majority, they call it in the Hidden Tribes report. That what's happening is the people on the extremes are really driving the agenda, but there's a lot of people out there that are just kind of shaking their heads or closing their eyes or looking for something better. And if you're looking for something better, join us. We can rise up. We can say enough. We can demand better from our political leaders and for others, and step up and get to know people. Find a community project. Develop some skills so you can talk to Aunt Jane, who votes in the other party. There's a lot of things we can do, and in the process, each of us can develop more hope and overcome this sort of negativity and despair that's so common right now.
I'm glad you brought up the exhausted majority because that was my next question. It's for those who are unfamiliar with it, it's a term for some 60% of Americans who are tired of political polarization and congressional dysfunction and want to see compromise that leads to solving America's big issues, such as overhauling our immigration system. Yet most of the majority is still under the influence of negative messaging, and if pushed, will automatically choose one political party over another rather than listening to civil discussion about the pros and cons of any suggestion or candidate. For example, if you ask a Democrat who they're going to vote for, they don't know, it's the Democrat. The same thing with the Republican, right? That's to say the number of people who are committed to civil discussion and finding common ground is still relatively small. How do we reach our fellow Americans and do it quickly?
Well, I worry that we're about doing it quickly because this is hard work and it's going to take time. But I think we have to, people have to say enough. This isn't working. We need something different. I mean, this is where we hope our book can help say people to say, wait a minute, stop. Something's wrong here. Something's going really wrong here in our country. And okay, if I believe that, where do I turn? And we hope that our book can be, okay, here's a couple here's something I could do. I could do a project in my community where there's a specific problem, or I could develop some skills to just have that conversation with a friend of mine that I met in high school that I haven't talked to for the last 20 years. And yet I miss her. We were good friends and we haven't talked to each other because of politics, but with a few skills, okay, I can do that. And then and people, take those little steps and we can rise up together. But it's not easy. I don't know that we can do. I don't know. It's going to take a real. I think when enough people are really dismayed, people can rise up and demand better. We're not quite there yet, but we're trying to do our part.
Yeah, I agree with the grassroots, the bottom up. I also think there is a role for top down. And I'm one of the things that I love about living where I do is that I get to help with the New Hampshire state legislature work. And this is pretty amazing. This is Doug's brainchild, and Doug and also a colleague of his, Patricia Higgins, who is a Democrat and he's a Republican, right? Former Republican state legislator. So they've been able to be influential in getting the New Hampshire state legislature, which is similar amounts of Republicans and Democrats, it's almost 50-50, to work together, right? And when people see their politicians working together and solving problems, or even just talking to each other in a diplomatic way where you can hear both sides and then you can craft stronger legislation because you're listening to both sides, that serves as an amazing model for everyday Americans. That's what I think we hope to see more of. And I'm just so grateful, Doug, that I've had that opportunity to work with you and Patricia on those initiatives, because I really do think it makes a big difference for the American people to see that in action.
And I
Well,
guess
I
that's
appreciate that. I just say that I mean, it's a work in progress. They had a pretty rough session last session, but we do have a core group of legislators who are really trying to make this work. And so I appreciate that, Beth. I know, and you've been very helpful, but it's an ongoing project. Sorry to cut you off there, Martha.
No worries. Apparently, Utah Governor Cox is also in the realm of common ground, and it's wonderful to see. He apparently, I don't remember the name of the program, but it's essentially making better decisions, and it's based on the common ground idea of soliciting information from both sides and then hearing each other out.
Disagree better.
Yes, which is wonderful,
Yeah.
right? But there are not that many of them at this.
Well, there's a lot of disincentives, and I first met Governor Cox, and he came to our Brave Angel Convention in Gettysburg 2 years ago, and it was a wonderful experience. And he asked me about the term conflict entrepreneurs, which I've heard him use in some of his public talks. And he did, as the president of the National Governors Association, he did initiate this Disagree Better initiative, and he had some meetings around the country, including one here in New Hampshire. Sadly, it didn't get much press coverage. See, this is part of the problem. The press only covers divisive stuff, and they don't necessarily cover, when something positive is happening. But he's been right in the forefront of it, and I mean, he has strong political views. I mean, he has pretty conservative politics that some people don't like, but he's been very insistent about doing it in a respectful way with people on the other side. And he's taken some pretty tough hits from people on his side. He he was at I believe it was the Republican convention in Utah. He was really getting sort of heavily criticized. And at one point he said something to the effect of, I see that you folks hate me because I don't hate enough. I mean, and this goes back to a comment we had earlier. When you're on your own side, it's safer, if you want to call it that, to just play along and denigrate the people on the other side and agree with the people who are doing that. And it's going to take leaders like Governor Cox to role model. No,
Yeah.
this isn't the way. There's got to be a better way, and so. We appreciate that, and we hope there'll be more that follow. But there's a lot of disincentives against that. It goes back to what Beth was talking about earlier about when you're talking to your own side, and you got hoeing the party line. And I've seen this with people elected for office. When I first ran for the legislature, we had pro-choice Republicans, pro-life Democrats. But nowadays, if you don't hoe the party line, you get heavily criticized, and you might face a primary challenge. So it's harder for people to step out and do this kind of work, unfortunately. But hopefully, if enough citizens demand better, we can create more space for folks.
I just want to jump in. I think it's important to realize that many journalists are conflict entrepreneurs, but not all. I think some are trying to promote the use of journalism and social media in a positive way. I want to shout out to Amanda Ripley, who coined the term conflict entrepreneurs and is an investigative journalist, and just loved her book, High Conflict. She had one section at the end where she brought these New York Jews. I'm from Long Island, so, I had that connection. New York City Jews to meet with these people who worked in Michigan jails. And the two of them, the two groups kind of got together. And she called it complicating the narrative, because people had stereotypes of each other and those were broken. So there are journalists out there who are really trying, and I really commend them and applaud them. And they're really trying to use their power and their platform in a way that will point out the conflict entrepreneurs and bring people together.
Okay. I have a last question. And I wanted to preface it by stating that I believe gerrymandering should be illegal. That's my personal opinion. As we've seen Texas redo its maps to gain 5 new Republican seats in the House, California is attempting to counter that action through Prop 50, a temporary redrawing of its districts to gain 5 Democratic seats. If California's attempt fails, the Republicans will retain control of the House even before the 2026 midterm elections take place, further eroding people's belief in democracy. My question is, when faced with that imminent possibility, what should those of us in the Common Ground movement focus on? Which is to say, what impact can a small fraction of the population have when faced with such a big problem?
Well, it's a challenging problem, and it's not a new problem. This has been around a while. In fact, there was a major case before the Supreme Court back in 2019, and they didn't take it. They didn't take action. So this gerrymandering has been well established I mean, these seats are all, depending on who's got the legislature, you have a lot of gerrymandering that's going on. This isn't like new this time around. It's getting a lot more attention. So yeah, it's unfortunate. I mean, there was a Don Bacon, I believe his name is a Republican congressman from Nebraska, who decided he isn't going to run again, and someone he said that he's a Christian first, an American second, and a Republican third, and someone booed him or criticized him, and he said, well, I don't know, are you more upset that I'm a Christian or an American ahead of being a Republican? But this is the sort of the hard reality that we've fallen into now as many of our political leaders, that they're locked into this idea that our way is the right way, there's no other way. And it is a scary proposition, because we've got to work together, and this all or nothing mentality is very scary.
Yeah, I just want to say I'm thinking about some practical solution, and certainly um, I feel like that is something that's going to either have to come from the voters to their legislators, or the legislators themselves valuing the importance of having that political difference, and seeing that in a positive light rather than in a negative light. That, it's like Abraham Lincoln's team of rivals, right? The idea is that when you have people who are poking holes in your ideas get stronger, your policy gets stronger. And that's what I'd like to see our country go back to. So, on a practical level, I don't know how much that's going to convince the politicians, right? But maybe knowing that, well, if we push this through in Texas, California is going to do the opposite. And just the idea that, where are we going with this, right? And having the voters say, this is ridiculous. Like, I really want to vote in an election, but I can't even vote. It's all primaries, right? And everything's going to be based on who wins the primary, and my vote isn't going to really matter if I am on the other side or whatever. So I think that it's got to come both from bottom up and top down, and people realizing that we're kind of getting into a zero-sum game with all of this, and we're straying away from what our democracy is supposed to be about, right? Which is that marketplace of ideas.
Yes, yes. That marketplace of ideas shrinking quickly. But thank you. I wanted to say thank you for joining me in conversation. It's really great to talk with you in the first place, and to get an update was really a treat. So, and thanks again to those of you who listened to this episode. You can find a post and transcript of today's interview on my blog, vigilantpositivity.wordpress.com. Please join our cause.